Okay, I think we are live. We are starters in EPI's webinar with Learning Through Landscapes. So I hope that's what you're all here for, to talk about climate and education, strategies for adaptation, learning and play. My name's James DiColo. I am a director at the Education Policy Institute. If you don't know of us, we're a small research institute based in London, focused on doing work with big government data to try to close the disadvantage gap in this country, and also, as we're doing today, to bring people together and convene people for discussions that can influence and support policy. And this one on climate and education is incredibly generously supported by Learning Through Landscapes, which Carly leads, who you can see. I don't know if it's beside me because your screen probably has all the boxes in a different order from me. So what we're going to be doing today is really building on two roundtables we've already had to talk about what about the curriculum, what about the physical spaces, and how do they ensure that children today are thinking about climate education and being able to access nature while they're at school. And today we're extremely lucky to have a phenomenal panel to talk about this with all of you. So we have Carly, who's the CEO of Learning Through Landscapes. We have Dawn, she's the CEO of the Windsor Academy Trust, bringing a more school-based perspective, along with Usha, who until recently was Director for Education at Advantage Schools Trust. She is also an Ofsted inspector and has huge experience in schools. And last but definitely not least, Christine leads climate education for Cambridge University Press and can give a perspective from outside the schools and supporting schools. So how is this going to work? What we're going to do today is we're going to have each of our panelists take 5 minutes to set out their feelings about how we can bring climate and education together to ensure that we're moving forward and tackling the climate crisis. This will all be recorded, so if you miss a word, can find this later on EPI's website alongside the comments. If you have any thoughts, please do put them in the chat. But after that, we'll be going to Q&A, and the Q&A will come from the Q&A function, not from the chat. Now, Helen and Alice from EPI are going to be here helping out with all this, moderating and guiding you to the right place. So if you forgot some of that, don't worry, they'll let you know. But then we'll have Q&A until 4:15. At 4:15, Stephen Morgan, the Minister for Early Education, is going to be joining us. We're very lucky to have him here. And then we will put to him the questions we've come up with in this first hour. So it's all of your thoughts in the chat, it's the thoughts of our panelists here, which we're going to try to use to pull together some sort of questions we want to put to the Minister when he arrives. All right, well, I think that's all for the practicalities now. So it just comes to our panelists now, start kicking off the substantive discussion. I think we're going to start off with Carly. Away you go.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, James, and thank you for EPI for hosting today. Why now, I suppose, is a question. Climate has been a conversation for decades. LTL was set up over 35 years ago to look at the use of space and the design of school grounds. I think people are becoming more and more aware of the climate crisis, both personally, but also we see the huge rise in climate anxiety in some young people. But I say some young people very distinctively because for some young people, climate isn't even a conversation they feel they can engage in. It's something that doesn't impact their life. And most solutions that we see posed to young people tend to have an economic solution. And we know for a lot of young people growing up in poverty, some of the things like electric cars and flying less aren't in their gift. So we have to be really careful of how we think about climate education and how we can really engage young people in what is a global crisis and not scare them, but make them understand the role they can play in helping find a solution. At Learning Through Landscapes, we try to do that in a really nice way. We try to show how nature-based solutions can really help with the climate crisis, but also give children and young people ownership over their involvement. But there is a policy level to this. Schools and the education estate are huge. They are twice the size of Birmingham in the UK. So what can we do to make that space climate resilient? And what can we do to adapt it to make it more friendly, give nature connection to young people in their everyday lives? We are so lucky that Sir David Attenborough is our patron. He helped found LTL over 30 years ago, and he believes that children have to experience something to care about it. And that's something that we try to do in our work. You don't know what you don't know. And therefore, knowing about nature and the solutions it can play are really important. And however great Sir David's documentaries are, and I'm sure we all agree he is a national icon, what he's done on the ground to actually make sure that children care about nature. But we see nature all over the world from him, which is awe-inspiring. But actually, we can have really amazing nature connection experiences in our own school grounds, and what that can do for young people to make them really care about the environment that they live in. I hope in this discussion we have a really robust, challenging conversation about what climate education looks like. I've come from an education background as well as a media background. I totally understand the view that teachers think, is this another thing I have to do? We understand the stress that teachers are under, we understand the curriculum is full, and we understand that lots of new things are going into it. And that's why we're really grateful that the new government are doing the curriculum review, and we're really want to work as a team in this policy that comes out of these meetings to help influence how this can easily be slotted into the new curriculum rather than it feeling like another challenge that schools have to take on. The other thing we need to protect is our school grounds. People are always stunned when I say that schools can be built with no outdoor space. And that's something we have to accept, that actually, when we have such a need for housing and other reasons, school grounds can be a reason to be sold off, and we need to protect those at all costs. Merrick Denton Thompson, that helped found LTL, believes it's like selling off the crown jewels or the family jewels. Once they're gone, you're very unlikely to ever get them back. And we need to protect those spaces for children to learn in, to play in, and to improve their mental health in, as we face a pandemic in its own right of children's mental health crisis and emotional-based school avoidance in schools. So finally, for my little bit, I just want to wrap up with something that I was very lucky enough almost a year ago to the day, when I did a speech at COP, to say. Climate education not only grows awareness of the natural world, but it empowers individuals to learn and make informed choices as they grow up. It inspires critical thinking, problem solving and innovation, essential skills for addressing the most complexity we face. But most importantly, climate education is a call to collective action, encouraging pupils and their teachers to work together to become responsible stewards, advocating for sustainability and creating positive change in their school grounds. In an era where the fate of the planet is intertwined with human knowledge and action, climate education must be at the heart of a sustainable and resilient future. And I put children and young people at the centre of all we're thinking to do that. And I would love it in your conversations and questions today if we can think of really practical ways that we can help take this policy and this conversation forward to make long-lasting change to our children's lives and education.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carly. And yeah, please do put all your questions for our panelists in the Q&A afterwards in the Q&A section. Now, Carly, you talked about pressure on the curriculum. How do you integrate these things? Obviously, it's a difficult thing. Teachers are under more and more pressure to pack more and more in. But Christy, you're thinking about this every day. How do we fit this in? How do we do it? So tell us, what's the answer?
Oh, thank you, James. Well, it's a pleasure to build on Carly's comments. And I hope my remarks will make a contribution around what is needed and how we can support schools to deliver climate education. And I'll start with the key message that maybe is not necessary for this audience, but certainly for others, that education is absolutely key to tackling the climate crisis. Some context, I know we all quote surveys. Cambridge, the survey that we did in spring 2024, we found that over 70% of UK adults think a greater focus on climate change at school would help students better understand how to tackle it. Over 58% of UK adults think a focus on climate change would prepare students for jobs in a green economy. So at Cambridge, we are focused on a number of underpinning principles for how we can bring about climate education. And a lot of this actually really resonates and builds on work from previous roundtables, and I think in particular the first roundtable that EPI hosted. We are talking about climate education as being integrated and inclusive, high quality, especially with regard to the need for accurate and evidence science. We're talking about it needing to be supported by effective pedagogy. We want it to be action orientated, giving students agency and help inform career choices. We want it to be assessed and recognised and be an important aspect of progression. And we want it to be global and local, agreeing the global consensus, but really needing local endeavours to bring that to life and make it relevant. In September, OCR published a report, the Striking the Balance report, around curriculum and assessment. And I'd like to call out a theme and some of the recommendations there. One theme that was there was around unevenness. And just as climate change impacts us all unevenly, so does climate change education. The report really called out the current levels of climate of education that most students receive around climate and sustainability being very inconsistent, depending largely on the policies and approaches adopted by individual schools and the efforts of individual teachers. There absolutely are opportunities within the current curriculum for the delivery of climate-related topics, but again, these opportunities are inconsistently accessible. Over 80% of students we surveyed in spring 2024 said that climate education would help them make more informed choices in their lives, food, energy, travel. But again, we acknowledge the unevenness of student opinion on this topic as well. Some of the other recommendations that came out of the Striking the Balance report around climate and sustainability were the need to provide a clear focus on green careers and progression routes, the need to address in a proportionate way that climate education features in GCSE content and is assessed and recognised accordingly. That there's now the topic, Carly called it out as well, that there is enough space and time in the curriculum for climate education. And I know this was addressed in the first roundtable as well. Also, the need to provide teachers with both generic training support, but also subject level, subject specific support. And on that point, at Cambridge, we're delighted to be working with Reach 2, the largest UK primary MAT, and also with the charity CAPE, Climate Adapted Pathways for Education, to roll out a carbon literacy course for school leaders and school staff. At Cambridge, we are taking steps to address the challenges around climate education and working to bring those principles I mentioned to life. How are we doing that? Quickly, just four points on that. We're increasing climate change content in textbooks, support materials and exam specifications. This is happening and possible outside of the obvious domains of geography and science. We're looking to apply that climate and sustainability lens more widely. That said, we are refreshing our Geography B specification to provide a clearer focus on climate change. We're developing new qualifications, such as the Cambridge National in Sustainability for business and communities. We also acknowledge the important need to look at enrichment opportunities and support, not just qualifications. I couldn't complete this list without talking about natural history. OCR's proposal for a new GCSE in natural history was accepted by the DFE in 2022. It's in an advanced stage of planning. It was stalled on the brink of delivery during the closing stage period of the last government and the general election. So let me finish with three calls. I'm going to reiterate three calls. One is the immediate rollout of the GCSE in natural history. The second, going back to the Striking the Balance report, is that the current review does consider two glaring omissions from the current curriculum, one of which is climate education, the other is digital literacy for completeness. And linked to this, the need for a mechanism for oversight and ongoing review of the curriculum rather than big bang reform. Carly finished with a statement about COP. Let me reference COP as COP29 has opened. We at Cambridge have asked governments and organisations to step up and be bold in their commitments and collaboration. We saw in the media today that the Prime Minister will make ambitious commitments on the part of the UK. We look forward to seeing and hearing that political will and ambition and commitment that's needed to drive the related national education action for climate and sustainability.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christine. And I'm sure that we've got lots of questions I can see already in the Q&A about curriculum. So we might come back to some of those points later on in the Q&A. But I think now we're going to turn to a perspective more close to schools with Dawn.
Great, thank you. So it's an absolute privilege to be the Chief Executive of the Windsor Academy Trust family of schools. We're 15 schools across the West Midlands, collectively serving 10,000 children, predominantly in city areas. And we have a really strong commitment to climate action education and sustainability. And it's an absolute privilege that 2 years ago we won the Environmental Trust of the Year award. And we are absolutely committed to being net zero by 2030 and aspire to be one of the leading trusts in the country around climate education sustainability. And I think the way in which I'll frame this is I'll talk a little bit about why it matters to us as school and trust leaders and how we can influence and shape policy. Secondly, some of the humble lessons that we've learned along the way in trying to put this into place across the group of schools. And then finally, just finish with a little bit around perhaps what next for schools and for the system. So why sustainability? Well, I think that we know that the DfE's opportunity mission has at the absolute heart of it, breaking down barriers to opportunity to ensure all young people achieve and thrive. And I really welcome the word thrive as well as achieve right at the heart of the opportunity mission. And if we think about thriving, we and many of our leaders in our family of schools read the book Thrive by Valerie Hannon back in 2020, actually towards the start of the pandemic. And we know that thriving, Valerie Hannon talks about thriving on 4 planes: on an intrapersonal plane, an interpersonal plane, a civic and community plane, and on a planetary and global plane. So if we think about thriving across all of those planes and then ask ourselves the question, what's the purpose of schooling and education? Children exist on all of those planes, and them thriving and the planet thriving will enable children to thrive. They're interdependent, not independent of each other. And so what we are very clear about is if we want to not just make the best education for young people today, but make the best education for people today so that our schools thrive, our communities thrive, and the planet thrives, we need to do something about it today. And I think that clearly we know that the opportunity mission also is very much interdependent with the clean energy superpower mission, and equally the highest sustained growth in G7 countries mission, 3 of the 5 missions of this government. But for me, as an educator, what I hear, I spend a day a week in schools listening to children. And as I'm in schools, I will undertake focus groups with children. And in those focus groups, I ask children 3 questions. What do you want me to hear? What would you like to ask me? And what advice would you give me? At every single one, without exception, children have raised sustainability and what I can do with them to help leave the world a better place for future generations. So that is why sustainability is one of our 5 big moves within our organisation. It is at the heart of our strategy, and it is planned for, reported for at every single level within our organisation. So the next part then is around the how do we do some of this and some of the lessons that we've humbly learned. Well, firstly, I'd say this, and that is that we need to make it omnipresent, not another thing to do, but part of everything that we do. Secondly, I think it's really important that we have a strategy. For us, we have a game plan for sustainability. I'll kind of wave it at you here. If you can see it, we have this set out, our game plan for sustainability in that big move. We need to make sure that what we do is that we then build it into not just our trust plan, we build it into our school transformation model, and it's part of our self-review and our planning in every single school, as well as at an organisational level. Equally, we need to make sure we've got the leadership capacity in schools and trusts. We have a leader at a trust level, one of our executive team members. We have a board member champion for sustainability. And equally, we make sure our senior leadership teams in every single school, there's somebody who leads it, as well as somebody who's given responsibility to work alongside them, who's passionate about it to make it happen. And I think then finally, we just need to make sure we win hearts and minds. Now, this is mobilising not just our 1,400 staff, this is mobilising our 10,000 young people and all of their parents, so that we're winning those hearts and minds. And what we've done then, simply a few tangible examples, is we've shaped this strategy around the DFE climate change and sustainability strategy around the 5 action areas. We've mapped them against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and equally the 10 One Planet Living Principles. And so simply, if we take the first one around climate, education and action, we've got it built into 16 different curriculum areas, both primary and secondary, not just science and geography. We've heavily engaged in the learning in nature, the environment, the DFE education nature parks. We have student leaders, so we have a What COP every October. It's obviously the COP this year, so we replicate that, bringing 120 people together. We then have a sixth form COP as well with our sixth form students, and they are empowered to drive action. Green skills is absolutely fundamental to the work that we're doing, and climate action challenges that we have in partnership. Rather than just climate education, we want our young people to have climate education, action education. Our estates and digital technology invested £4 million through the public sector decarbonisation scheme and changing the way in which we use our capital monies around things like solar panels, LED, etc., etc. Digital technology, one-to-one devices for all young people. And these have had a massive impact on reducing gas consumption by 16%, electricity consumption by 35%, overall energy consumption by 22%. We've generated 1 million kilowatts of green energy, electricity, which is enough to power 100 homes every single year through solar panels, reduced photocopying by 21%, and reduced our CO2 emissions by 40% over the last 4 years. Our operations and supply chains, really building in sustainability into procurement weighting, ensuring our staff have access to EV charging, and introducing a salary sacrifice scheme for electric vehicles. Zero to landfill recycling, and really thinking about our catering. And then on an international system level, really thinking about, we've been working with Schools of Tomorrow through international student conferences and international collaboration. My final points would be around, now is the time. Let's learn from each other. Because I think the more we can learn from each other, the more we can do. And we can absolutely do this. Let's not wait for others to give us permission. Let's just do this. And I'll finally finish with this quote from David Attenborough. He's been quoted a couple of times already. We're at a unique stage in our history. Never before have we had such an awareness of what we're doing to the planet. And never before have we had the power to do something about it.
Thank you, Don. That is quite inspirational. Before we come to Usha for the last contribution for the panelists and then go to Q&A, I have 2 minor housekeeping things. One is that we've got a lot of great questions. Thank you so much for putting those in the Q&A. If you have things that you just want to tell everyone about, pop them in the chat rather than the Q&A so that everyone can discuss them. Because I think if you put them in Q&A, no one else is going to be able to answer them except our panelists. So this is for our panelists. Some of these I know are now quite directly for one panelist or the other. Like, are there going to be free resources in sub-Saharan Africa? I think this is mostly for Christine. So I think you can click on type answer in those Q&A. So please, if there are things there that you think are for you and you know the answer, panelists, please, when you're not talking, do dive in there. Type the answers in and get back to people right away. And then some of these broader questions we'll pull out in the Q&A after Usha's contribution. But Usha, I'm sorry, I've kept you too long here. Please, away you go. Usha, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, your remarks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. That was most interesting. I've also been thinking quite a lot about curriculum because I think when there is a change, we all get, and we've been through this very many times before. Well, at my age, one would have been through that very, very many times. The time when there is a change of shift, and this is that exciting moment where we've got major development, not only in our country but across the world, and the initiatives in schools. As always, schools will begin, they will work, they will carry on wherever we are on the other side of the other side of the wall, if you like, where the work's going on. And I kind of was very interested in looking at particularly the concerns around beginning to develop curriculum in different ways, with different ideologies, with different purpose in mind as well. And I thought there is quite an approach, unless and until talking about, and there is a fair, I think, concerns around us not being quite up to date with the curricular mapping and curriculum delivery in schools as yet, because it's all coming along, and your examples that we've just seen and heard, and there's an awful lot of work going on, but just thinking about where the risks will be and what it is that, and just speaking for myself in my very small area of work at the moment, I think getting the curricular implications clear is going to be absolutely critical, not just for individual organizations, but across the nation and beyond. And just thinking about the curricular implications, I kind of recall, and I suppose it's going back in time, I recall when the national curriculum was introduced and implemented, and the kind of massive amount of thinking and work and excitement was around that. And I kind of see that kind of excitement coming this way again. If we actually, and I've been thinking just very briefly, sharing with you, nothing new, but thinking about the cross-curricular, not getting carried away and thinking we haven't got this and we haven't got this in schools in terms of our own guidance for schools, and schools are all looking for things, as you know, you will know that far more than I do. And I think I was thinking that in terms of curriculum, but in particular to implement all the objectives, all the passions that we have here in terms of our curriculum development, it would be, how can we embed, and what we are saying here is there's a lot of work to do and we have a long way to go. How can we ensure embed climate education? And this is one of the questions I saw that was in the papers that have come to us, across the phases and across the curriculum. And what might an environmental lens offer in an already overloaded curriculum? And I think it's that because I think probably I'm spend more time with teachers than I ever did in my other roles. And I find that very stimulating and very interesting to see where they're coming from, and the place they're coming from is the place that we all need to be mindful of, and not only mindful, but that needs to be the base of all our work that is going on and will continue to go on. And in terms of how can we embed climate education across the phases, this is one of the questions that I saw across the phases and across the curriculum. what might an environmental lens offer in an already overloaded curriculum. And I think what I started to thinking and doing some work on my own, just by way of my own knowledge and my own experience, and thinking this is so true, because it isn't the cross-curricular dimensions, because unless we map the learning and the development we want to see, not just in our policy papers and not just in our changes to our examinations, actually in terms of getting the teacher in that classroom becoming confident and understanding what are the implications of the curricular changes and the curricular content and processes and learning that is terribly exciting, even though we're feeling disappointed at the moment, thinking we haven't got enough, we haven't got this, but we have enough thinking here to say, how can we this was one of the questions too, how can we ensure all schools in the country have equitable access to nature? And I think in terms of the cross-curricular dimensions, that would be, there is a and I will go back a long way back to the national curriculum when we had a major overhaul as a nation. The same thinking was adopted, the same concerns were raised then. And here, I think the cross-curricular dimensions. So what I am saying here is that in terms of looking at curriculum development, which actually provides a framework, cross-curricular dimensions and skills and education for citizenship. Those are the three aspects, which are three of the dimensions of a curriculum, which schools and teachers everywhere will need to be very clear about as to what lies beneath, what drives those. The dimensions in particular were of great interest to me, because that is where all the disadvantages, the concerns that we talk about, and that was also in one of these questions here. The schools and the education for there are these skill and it's not just cross-curricular dimensions that schools, and I think we will need to map across, and not just map across in one school, but map across in terms of cross-curricular dimensions, equality, looking at making, what are those dimensions, making sure, and this is just thinking about things that we must not take us back when we did the last major review of the national curriculum. So it's saying, going back to access to special needs, to ethnicity, all those issues that matter deeply in cross-curricular dimensions of our curriculum. The skills independent of provision, providing the core skills will be part of that dimension. So it's how do we map those dimensions and skills and the education for citizenship, all of those important curricular aspects and policies and practice, and most importantly, the learning that must take precedence. And we got involved and absolutely taken to. There was such excitement around the new national curriculum that we missed out on that. We missed out on that. Those ways of thinking. We missed out on that knowledge and the excitement that the participation of the teachers and the young people themselves in that curriculum coming up in terms of the education for all the three of the dimensions I was thinking of in particular, which are around the equal opportunities for all students, but also the access to curriculum, the as well as the aspects of all things equality, and recognizing that there are what comes from the basic curriculum. The cross-curricular elements will offer us a lot of support in making sure that those dimensions and those skills and themes are that all pupils can have access to that curriculum for us in terms of our thinking as well. And
Brilliant.
I think in terms of I'll be 2 minutes. On terms of skills and the education for citizenship, I think
Usha,
yes.
I'm sorry. Well, I think we're going to have to get to a Q&A. I wonder if you could leave that point for your response to a question.
Look, let me leave. I can leave it there, and you can we can go into Q&A when you go into Q&A. I'm happy to take your advice and go that way. And okay,
brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists for those starters. So I hope that the chat is working now, and thank you for mentioning that. Sorry about that. Yes, and we've got lots of questions here. Some of those, I think, like the questions about the role of government, maybe we leave for when the minister arrives. But there are a few here, I think, that we haven't quite addressed so far that would be really good to get through. But the first set, probably from people like Kumbirai and John, are about how people can practically get involved. We've got over 100 people on this call, people talking about they work in FE. What should they do? People who work in SLT, and they're saying, Dawn, how have you managed to bring this into SLT rather than it just being in the classroom, make it a whole organizational endeavor? So I wonder if panelists could reflect, maybe just in a minute or so, about like how they've seen people who are educators being able to practically get involved and what those avenues look like. And maybe we go back to Carly first.
Hi, thank you so much, James. Great question. Yeah, how to get involved. There is so much out there. It's really sometimes hard to disseminate where to start. National Education Nature Park, for those that know, it goes from early years all the way through to further education. It is a DFE funded project. There are grants in it to help you on that journey, and it's basically looking at the education estate as one nature park and how we can all contribute to that. We are a partner in that in early years, but there's some great resources being written around climate education for that. And if you sign up, you can do some amazing citizen science work. Very quickly, as far as bringing your SLT and your team on board, there are lots of organisations that hate sort of saying we do everything. We give grants to kind of start you on that journey through Local Schools Nature Grant. There's a year-long programme as well. And I think it's what we see as a failure in a lot of schools is when one person carries this load. So something like Forest School, which has such brilliant outcomes in so many ways, can often actually collapse when that member of staff leaves. So what we say is theory, it's almost a culture of change within the school. You want your site team to be happy if there's muddy clothes around. You want your parents to understand why necessarily children are outdoor learning more and they're not at their textbooks all the time, because some parents find that quite hard. They don't think it's proper learning, and it absolutely is. So I would say look at the great resources out there. There's lots, including Outdoor Classroom Day. Someone's mentioned Global Things. That has 12.5 million children signed up worldwide. And I would say, as far as great environmental things go, we are all for planting trees. But before you start on the journey, make sure you have a package which takes that forward. Trees only become environmentally helpful if they live. And what we see is a lot of things go into schools as great projects in that moment, but they don't have actually a strategy that they sit among. So I would say very much maybe take some time, have a deep breath. It's a big journey to go on. And I think, I'm sure Dawn will say, it's what's right for you and your young people that you work with, especially when it comes around to cultural engagement and social and economic disadvantage. A lot of things don't feel obviously inclusive. So look at your school community, and then choose what's best for you. But always reach out, because I can tell you one thing, people that work in this sector are really passionate about sharing our knowledge. And I know that there's lots out there. So, and we'll make sure as part of this report, we put a list of organisations that can help as well.
Thanks, Carly. Dawn, you've obviously done a huge amount to bring it to the senior leadership here. How have you managed that?
So I think fundamentally, people will do things if they understand why. And so for me, everything goes back to why this matters. And, you know, I think we all know intuitively that we need to do something about this for our children. And what is more, I suppose, moral imperative in education than ensuring that they've got a world to inherit in the future? There is an absolute moral imperative that I think sings to educators anyway. However, we need to be a bit cleverer than we currently are. So I think what we need to do is to start to perhaps speak in another language as well. And I don't mean another physical language. What I mean by that is to say, okay, so we need children to attend school. How do we make school so compelling that irrespective of what parents are saying, that children will get out of bed and want to come to school in the morning?
Mhm.
So what I mean by that, there are real opportunities with things like they care about the environment. When they're learning in the natural environment, there are ways of making the curriculum so engaging that children want to come to school and be part of it. Ways of ensuring that the children are pairing and nagging parents and saying, please don't book a holiday for that time because I really want to come to school. So I think there are things like that. We know that mental health is some kind of creating white water within education. And we know if we have an eco hubs, we have forest schools, all of those things in our schools, we know that that can really help the mental health and well-being of our young people. And I think that there are, and what we've certainly done is had really honest, frank conversations. We had all of our leaders together yesterday, and we have conversations around why this matters, not just in terms of the long term,
Yeah.
needs in terms of children and school, and the things that I suppose are the core business around attendance, engagement, behaviour, etc., now. Plus, it's just the right thing to do, and people know that. They just give them permission to do it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Usha, it sounds like you want to chip in there as well. Would you like to comment on how you think people could get involved?
Sorry, were you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't quite catch that. Yes, I think you know, I'm thinking about this is a lifetime of chances, if there was one, to have children as the decision makers in mapping that learning that's got to be done, in making that transition from where we are to where we need to be, or we are going, or our ambition is to be. And that's my you know, not just they telling what we are doing in schools, but they driving it. And if we can't have them driving it, then it won't happen, because you and I'd be gone next week, and they are here with their world. So how can we work in ways, you know, as those policymakers and leaders in all different parts of this game, how are we going to make sure the earth belongs to them? It belongs to, this change belongs to them. And I know there are, and we've just heard of a super example where there are schools very alert to that. But, you know, for one, there are many that have no intention of spending a whole lot of time to get a scheme of work together, if I may use that not a very good word as far as I go. But the schemes of work, and they are imported and they are given, and they start working on something different. But the actual change of the moment we have missed. So that's my passion, really, to see that this earth really does belong. The world belongs to them, and where are they? And will we be able to spot where they were on this journey? And I'm sure we've got that will happen. But note of caution for myself to say, look for it, Usha, and I would be looking, and that's what matters, because otherwise it will not be sustainable development of whatever kind, any sort, whatever one is carrying on one's head. We will have gone through the process, but will the change have occurred that we all longed for so much?
Brilliant. Thank you. Christine, we've had an update from John in the chat, I think, about how it is that NGOs, charities, and other organisations that support schools can support them in a way that they can really engage with, when educators have so little time. They can't be out there reading all these additional reports and things in their weekends and evenings. Those are already taken up with marking. So how is it that organisations such as yours can engage with educators to actually bring them into this process?
Yeah, it's a great point, and the issue of time is such a sensitive one. And at the risk of throwing another responsibility onto teachers and educators, I think there's an incredible opportunity for those people that are informed and passionate about climate and sustainability to support education providers like our own organisation and many like us, to help us build our capacity in terms of what we do. Obviously, we all have expert sources, but again, I think building this community of experts is a great opportunity. And an example I can give is we've launched a research community around climate and sustainability, and we welcome teachers to that community as their time permits, and we ask their advice on things like we're just releasing guidance around the practicalities of getting started with climate change education. But again, before we launch that into the world, we will consult with our research community to give us guidance on that, and to help us pilot initial guidance. So we welcome very much opportunities to engage with teachers and educators.
Brilliant, thanks. I see more questions here to specific panelists, like Dawn. I think there's something to you about how you have engaged with climate ambassadors and whatnot. Well, I'm probably reading that badly. Sorry, trying to read 5 things at once here. But yeah, panelists, do please get involved and answer these questions there, which I'm leaving up so you can write answers to them when you're not speaking. So I guess something that I've pulled out of this as well, all these questions that's been mentioned, is the importance of the phase of education and children's age. That you know, Chris is saying, well, you know, you can't just confine it to one phase. You can't say, oh, it's in the curriculum later, but not earlier. And then Sally's saying, well, actually, you know, when you're younger and you're in the early years, often you're playing outside quite a lot in many places in primary school. But then as you go through your education, you transition to being behind desk so much more, spending so much less time outside and in the natural world. And so how should we think about addressing these issues at each phase, and what are the specific problems that each phase faces, and what we need to do about those things? I think that covers a few of the questions there. Maybe I've missed a couple of people who mentioned them. Apologies if I did. I know, Christy, you've just published your whole review of these things, so I wonder if you want to lead off on this.
Yeah, thanks, James. And this maybe what I'll say in response also links into another question that was on the Q&A about sort of, you know, what do we teach apart from carbon, but when it comes to sort of climate and sustainability. But absolutely, I think we do have an opportunity to integrate across different ages and different stages, and I think you know, there's also the aspect of how we can bring sort of skills or challenge-based learning, you know, right the way through the curriculum. So, you know, what a primary school child how they might consider a challenge, say, around the oceans, you know, at a certain age is different to how they might have that discussion later on. So I think, you know, there's that sort of multidisciplinary approach, which is actually the whole school approach, which is quite natural in primary schools. I think it is possible to then extend that up into secondary through that challenge-based or project-based approach. So that's where I'd start, James.
Brilliant, thanks. Dawn, how have you managed this?
Yeah, so we have Kat Howard, who has written the book Symbiosis, is a curriculum expert. She leads our curriculum across the family. We have subject directors across the family, and then we obviously have similarly with our primary schools as well as secondary. So in essence, where we started is just doing a review of our curriculum to see where it already is, and you'd be surprised because it's not just in geography and science.
Right.
Many teachers are already using sustainability as inspiration for poetry, for debates, for critical thinking, a whole range, for maths, solving maths problems, a whole range of things. So I think it's kind of by starting off by understanding where it currently is. And then I think, secondly, what we've done is work strategically in a very authentic, not a tokenistic way to work with our trust-wide subject domain experts, directors, to look at where the opportunities are to meaningfully build it into the curriculum. So we have a sustainability is built, and climate education and climate action education, because it's not just learning about the climate, which sometimes can frighten children, it's them being empowered to do something about it, which is much more inspiring, built into the curriculum in each year group, even from our early years, and then all the way through, as I've said, 16 different subjects within secondary. It's easier than we think, and I think that lots of people can use it as a hook rather than necessarily just the specific content, if that makes sense. And it's much more engaging for children too, because they're learning about something they're passionate about by and large.
I'd love to, if I can just ask a small follow-up there, Dawn, where someone's asked, well, but how do you get your staff excited about this?
I think staff are, I think, again, it just goes back to why are we doing this? And when people understand why, and we intuitively understand why, but we talk about it. So we have our principles that we build into our curriculum. So we're deeply intentional about it. We don't impose it, we talk about it. So what do you think? And so, you know, there are many teachable moments in the curriculum where tangible examples can be brought by the teachers in the moment. And it's them having enough knowledge and expertise and enough empowerment to be able to bring it into the curriculum too.
Thanks. We've got hands up here for panelists. I need to come back to it, apparently. Christine, do you want to come back on this before I go to Carly?
Yeah, I've just been really, Dawn has made a great point that I wanted to build on, the point about auditing and reviewing, because again, as an education provider, we do see that we've got a responsibility to make clear as possible to schools and colleges where they can already find climate and sustainability related sort of content and skills. So that's what we're doing at the moment, is really auditing and reviewing, so that we can signpost to schools, well, this is where you're already dealing with these with this content. I think that's really important because you know, time is a challenge, but also schools are probably, well, they may well be covering a lot more around this than they might think.
Thanks. Carly, you're keen to jump in here.
You'd think after a COVID lockdown, I'd still be able to take myself off mute in time before I started speaking. Apologies, everybody. I agree with everything the panel have said. I think when it comes to looking at how we embed this, so many organisations have done a curriculum map already. So a lot of that work exists. So Dawn, you've been so good in actually channeling out time for your team to do this. But a lot of this work has already been done as well for maybe people starting on that journey. So like I said, please look at what's already out there, and we will signpost you. I really don't think we can underestimate the importance of experiential learning and outdoor learning in this journey, actually connecting children to what they are learning about. And some emerging research that's come from it's been around now for about 6 years, but is getting stronger and stronger, is the evidence that teachers that are confident to teach outdoors, actually those schools have a higher level of teacher attainment than those that don't. And as we have a bit of a crisis in teacher attainment at the moment, I think we really need to take seriously the evidence around how the health benefits of being outdoors, the mental health and wellness benefits of being outdoors can really benefit both students and teachers. But also, I think we have to look at neurodivergency as well, and how actually learning subjects in a different way can be really beneficial to a lot of children and young people. And experiential learning is a really good way of that journey of discovery that we know is what makes critical thinking. And I think so many times we overthink these things in the classroom rather than challenging children and young people to kind of do this in their own way. And very quickly, back to the age thing. So much of our curriculum is a growth curriculum, maths, English, PHSE, they start at early years and they go all the way
Absolutely.
through. And I think the decision where we sit in both ways at the moment is, do we make climate education its own thing? Or do we just embed it in what's already there? And my view is we embed it in what's already there. It is a skill that we're going to see young people. And I loved what Dawn said about learning from her students. One thing I would say and we're hearing this more and more, is you have students in your classrooms now whose families in a developing world, or even could be in Spain or Europe or closer, are directly affected by climate and forced migration because of climate. So actually a lot of children are living this journey, have family members who are directly affected by climate, and therefore their view on it shifts massively. And I think that kind of understanding how we can hear them and learn from that experience and their desire to know more and to try and find solutions, because fundamentally that's what the climate education is to make children feel comfortable in knowing it, to have control of it, to not be scared by it, but then use that amazing brains and energy to try and find solutions to a problem that we know needs fixing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kylie. And you mentioned teacher education and where that would fit in. Usha, I know you spent a lot of time in teacher education. How do you think this can fit in?
How do I think?
This can fit into teacher education.
I think it is essential, absolutely fundamental, because this is not just a curriculum subject that's going to come into being in school. This is a way of thinking, a way of living. This is about where you're going along in the rest of your life, if you are 17 today, or you are 4 years old today. So I think emphasizing the reverence, of course, for nature. You know, Avanti schools are a Hindu trust schools, and to our children there, in children in that context, and speaking about myself too, nature and sustainability, they're not concepts that we think are fashionable to jump onto, but this is a way of living. You know, the worship of rivers and the equally the kind of absolute what is the word I'm looking for? Not religious, but spiritual beliefs, and your religious beliefs also, which are less relevant in contexts of schools. So because we're talking about, you know, diverse communities, but the children must be the decision makers. They must learn those skills and have that knowledge, as we know, you know, the school here that's represented so beautifully. They are managing to capture their interest and their knowledge and excite them about it. And it is, like I said, you know, they are the ones who've got to understand why we need to do what's not happening right now and must happen. And that's a dialogue that's got to happen for them between themselves, with some very clever people like sitting here, I'm sure, along with us. Give it to them, hand it to them, and make it possible for them to understand what it's all about and where the game changes. Because I think that's where we will get, I know we will get very interested and very busy with curriculum development, which is perfect. It's nothing wrong about that. But I'm saying, will we have taken children and the young people and the communities along with us towards that change, which will be forever and not just for today, because it was an interesting conference to go to. So that's my passion. That's where I am, because you know, yeah, it's philosophical. They are belief, deeper spiritual notions that you harbor, and how you treat the world is how the world will treat you, as my mother used to say to us, and I think that is true.
Fabulous, thank you. Dawn, you want to come back in here?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think so often we think about the curriculum as what we teach. I also think it's really important we think about where we teach it and how we teach it.
Yeah, well, actually, we have had a few questions here about outdoor spaces. I was going to leave those, I think, until Stephen arrives, because I know this is something he is responsible for, but we are going to come back to that as well. Carly, did you want to jump in here? I saw a hand up there.
Yeah, obviously, we're an outdoor learning charity, so all about where in the spaces we teach. One thing I think is important in this conversation, and I think you kind of touched on it a bit, James, is initial teacher training. Teacher confidence is a huge barrier in this journey, and especially in Nature Connection, we see some, young teachers coming through that haven't had this embedded in their own curriculum. They don't have that natural level of nature connection themselves, and therefore they're nervous about their knowledge base when it comes to teaching their pupils and students. And I think that actually one of the things that will make this sustainable in every way is that actually we see climate education put into initial teacher training, because we need teachers to feel really confident in this subject. And it is big. And I kind of always say it's a bit like when you've met somebody 4 or 5 times and you're embarrassed to ask their names. There's so many statistics around about climate, and there's so much information about a degree here now that people are a bit embarrassed if they don't know it. And that's the worst thing we know with politics and everything else, is when people don't feel they can engage in it. And therefore, teachers are nervous. It's one of the reasons that we've changed so much of our work to this, is because that's what we were asked to do. There is a real desire from teachers to have a better knowledge base on this before they start to take it outside or do this curriculum. And I think that we need to be really mindful of that as this exciting new curriculum comes through, that it's not overwhelming, especially for early career teachers, that this isn't something else when they're trying to do classroom management and learn about mental health and all neurodivergency and all of those things that are such dynamics in the classroom now, that this is something that they feel that they can really be confident in delivering to their students.
So I think as we expect the minister any minute now, but this ministers always they're running slightly late between 20 different things. I wonder if it's worth turning to the question of sort of the curriculum and performance tables and Ofsted and the constraints that places on schools. Quite a few people in the chat have referred to how performance tables tie down what they're doing, how Ofsted's expectations tie down what they're doing, how the prescriptions of the curriculum tie down what they're doing. We've talked about how it could be expanded, how things could be built into more aspects of the curriculum. But what do you think the really important binding constraints are on schools at the moment that stop them from doing this? Because we're hearing from some schools, like Dawn's, where they seem to have gone an awfully long way already, whereas we've got other people in the question and answers saying that actually they feel they're so constrained, it's hard for them to find the time and the space or the senior leader sort of enthusiasm for doing these sorts of things. So what are these central challenges that we need to be tackling, that the government can do something about, which we can ask the minister about when he arrives? Dawn, you've had so much success here already, so I wonder if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so I don't think it's either or. It's and certainly from my perspective. And we've just had a school of 1,800 that's just got outstanding in 5 different measures, including sixth form. And some of the sustainability and climate change is part of why the curriculum is so rich, why children love coming to school, why there's so many doing Duke of Edinburgh Award, why we're doing, why there's so many of them are empowered to volunteer and engage within their community and play that civic role. So I think that we perhaps need to change our mindset, that we're not allowed to do it, or we haven't got time and to do it.
Yeah.
And not an either or. You can't be successful in Ofsted or get great outcomes if you're focused on this. I think it just adds the richness to it. It's about simplifying it and building it in authentically and intentionally into the being and the culture and groups of schools would be the point that I make.
So are there any constraints that you feel at the moment, or do you feel like you have the freedom you need to do all of this already?
Yeah, well, I always feel that anyway. If we do great school improvement, if we want children to, and I love our moral purpose is unlocking academic and personal potential. In essence, if you just change those words in, academic is achieving, personal potential is thriving. Where I'd really like to see this go is really when we start to define the opportunity missions view of what thriving is. There for me is the opportunity around climate action, education and sustainability. That's where I think we need to go with it, rather than right now building it into the accountability mechanisms.
Thank you. Isha, you've been an HMI for a long time. Do you think there are any things Ofsted needs to do to enable this in schools?
I think I've been on both sides, obviously, with Ofsted. And what, having a school inspected that was kind of way below in all its scores when it came to providing what we would traditionally say achievements and attainments of pupils, but because of just all the things that Dawn is saying, the kind of passion amongst children about, and this was the very particular context. So I think one thing about Ofsted, certainly I would say, is you will not be, the evidence is always what speaks for itself, and it should. If it doesn't, there is something terribly wrong. And evidence is, as in the impact that the school makes on the pupils, as we all know, not just their achievements academically, but it's what that place is, who it belongs to whom. And if that school inevitably, as you walk in, seems to belong to the young people who are thriving there, Ofsted is not going to go away giving negative judgments, I hope and believe. So I think Ofsted has a very much, from all my time there, it was always about the children and young people. And it was always about those communities that you serve in the school. Now, I know there are millions of different experiences people have of Ofsted, but in terms of judgments that a country makes on its own provision, they are, as far as my experience goes, more or less always, not ever, but there is a scale of transparency which is helpful to try and always tease out whether it was a fair or an unfair judgment. But to my mind and in my experience, it was, 9 times out of 10, the evidence stacked up. But there were times that it could have gone either way in terms of the judgments and whatever was handed over. But if Ofsted is stopping innovative thinking and rightful kind of achievements of whole communities of schools who give their lives to children and give their lives to those people in those sometimes very challenging communities, I can't say that they were unfair judgments always, but they were not. I think
okay, I think we might pause there. We might pause there because luckily for us, Stephen has arrived. Thank you so much for coming along, Stephen. Yeah, okay. And we'll come back to you in a minute, Sher. So in case anyone doesn't know Stephen, he's now the Minister for Early Education. And Stephen, I think what we're just talking about at the moment, as we go through to discuss climate and sustainability in education in this webinar, is what the big challenges are for schools in implementing this that are presented by government policy and by Ofsted, as Usha was just talking about. Now, we're going to hear from Carly and Christine about this, but I understand you have some remarks that you might want to make on this point yourself. So I wonder if you might like to chip in now, and then we can come to Carly and Christine.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Really good to see you again, James, and thank you for having me along to this session. Thanks to EPI and Learning Through Landscapes for hosting and for inviting me along to join you for the discussion. It's absolutely fantastic to be with you all this evening. I'm actually delighted to be joining this conversation. Sustainability in education is a top priority of mine, and to make meaningful change on this agenda, government must listen to the sector, to consult with you and build feedback mechanisms into our policy making. It's in that spirit that I'm joining you this evening to listen and to learn your views on what works, what doesn't, and where we need to go further. Now, the department's vision for the UK education sector is to be a world leader on sustainability, and that was set out in the Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy back in 2022. And for me, what I want to do is focus on 4 key areas as the Minister responsible for sustainability across education. 1, on sustainable school estates, ensuring sustainability in our school estates, focusing on mitigation, adaptation and resilience. Secondly, on curriculum integration, securing the place for sustainability in the curriculum, both through the curriculum and assessment review that we've launched and more immediate initiatives like the National Nature Park Initiative. Thirdly, international leadership. DfE's vision, as I mentioned, is for the UK education sector to be a world leader in sustainability and climate change by 2030. And we're already some way towards achieving that goal, but there is so much more to do to ensure the relationship between sustainability and education is recognised globally. And then fourthly, for me, is youth engagement, embedding the voice of young people in the DfE sustainability work. We've got youth focal points are a fantastic example of this, and we've learned so much from working with them already. So James, thanks again for the opportunity to join you this evening and look forward to the discussions.
Well, thank you so much for coming along, Stephen. We really appreciate it. And you won't be surprised to hear that what you're saying there, particularly with regards to estates and youth engagement and curriculum integration, are all things that have been extensively referenced already in this discussion. Now, Carly, I think maybe we come to you next, because these are the ambitions. I doubt there's much disagreement about the ambitions. Where do you think, as we were talking about, the big barriers are, and what can Stephen do?
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. It's lovely to meet you. I agree with your 4 main missions. They couldn't align more to the work of LTL. I'm just going to focus a little bit on the school estate, because we are an unusual organisation. We're founded by landscape architects and educators, so we understand that design and use of space. And I think one of the things with the financial pressure on schools is the role of Section 77 and the selling off of school grounds, and also the fact that schools can still be built with no immediate outdoor access. I think with the nature park, the DfE, it's wonderful to see how much there is going on in the nature park, how much schools are engaging with it. We're really lucky to be leading on some of the early years work in that project. But I do think with the pressure, the selling off of school grounds is an area that really needs to be explored more deeply. I understand the financial pressures on schools, but as we say, LTL, once that estate's gone, it's like selling off the family jewels. It's not coming back. And I think for young people to have a really, putting that youth voice at the centre of it, they need that space. And our work at LTL over the past 30 years has proven to us that, you know, we always say it's the space that children and young people own. So teachers own what the classroom looks like and how it's used. Parents own what your house looks like and your bedroom looks like and you use. But the school grounds is where you explore. It's where you develop resilience. It's where you develop all those skills with your friends you may not do because of mental health or home, or not being allowed out to play as freely as before. And so that space is so precious for children. And I've been lucky enough, my job, to go all over the world and speak to lots of young people and children about how they use the grounds around their education estate, their school setting. And it's amazing how they use it. It's always to do something really exciting. I'm always dragged behind a tree or a bush. And I think that ownership of that space, and then how educators and teachers can come in to really make sure that that space is being used well, it's designed well, it's climate resilient, but also that education can happen out there, but the children feel ownership over it and really learn what they can do to help with climate mitigation in that space as well. Like nature-based solutions, it's a perfect place to start exploring those things.
Brilliant, thank you, Karen. And I hope we haven't entirely lost Stephen here with technical difficulties. No, he's back. He's back. Stephen, I wonder if you wanted to say anything about the estate there. I know you said it's one of your priorities. And Kylie said how she thinks it is so important to move on this. Is there anything you can say about how you're hoping to improve the situation for schools that don't have space or might currently be able to be built without outdoor space?
Yeah, thanks, James. And apologies, I'm not used to using Zoom. I'm fully over to Teams these days. Really helpful points, and obviously decisions around the selling of land is one for schools, but one that absolutely I do recognise and happy to consider. You know, for me, it's very clear that access to nature is vitally important for young people as they gain understanding of sustainability and climate change, but also for their mental health and well-being. And access to nature is so important part of a young person's opportunity to learn. I mean, that's why I've been so hugely impressed by the National Nature Park initiative that was launched over a year ago. We've got over 3,000 settings, so schools and nurseries and other settings already involved. We want to double that number, and that's very much about turning grey spaces green and giving young people access to nature. And when I've seen that firsthand visiting schools up and down the country, young people are just so inspired by being involved in that, be that seeing a living wall or by planting trees or wild meadows. It's just a brilliant initiative, and really keen to make sure more schools are involved in that programme, and that's why the department's very keen to work with schools to make that happen.
Brilliant. And is there anything you can say about future schools? We've got some question in the comments saying sometimes it happens that sort of funding runs out for building new schools, particularly because before the outdoor landscaping is really done, that priority is given to indoor spaces, and schools are still built this way. Is that something you see changing?
Yeah, so I've been really impressed by what I've seen so far in the department with regards to making schools more sustainable, but there's always more we can do. And certainly some of the best innovation I've seen is where they've really considered access to nature at the heart of the design of the school buildings. And I'm visiting some schools across the country that do that already in due course. And if people have got ideas and thoughts about what more we can do, I'll always be delighted to hear from schools directly.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, Christine, you are obviously very focused on curriculum integration. You've released a report about how this can happen. I'm sure Stephen is looking around for ideas, not just from inside the department with all the brilliant minds he has there, but from you too. So what do you think should happen next?
Okay, so I will reference the report, James, but then I would like to ask Stephen a slightly different question as well, if that's okay. So, Stephen, it's a pleasure to be on the call with you today. James has referenced the report we released in September as OCR Striking the Balance, where we talked about curriculum and assessment, and we're looking forward to supporting Professor Francis's curriculum and assessment review. And one thing we absolutely called out there was I think we called it the glaring omission, two glaring omissions within the current curriculum, one being climate education, the other one being digital literacy. And we did have a list of recommendations within that report there around how we could further the mainstreaming of climate education. And we will definitely follow up on that in terms of the recommendations there. The slightly different question, sort of building on that, actually comes to a remark I made at the beginning of the session, which was about the importance of education in tackling the climate crisis. And I'm wondering how you think we might raise the profile of education and its importance in tackling the climate crisis, and how much do you see the cross-portfolio work with your colleagues in environment, energy is important in terms of our achieving a response to the climate crisis?
Do you want me to take that, James?
Yes, sorry, Stephen, sorry, yes.
No, great. So those that are on the call that aren't familiar, as I mentioned earlier, we've launched this independent curriculum and assessment review headed up by Professor Becky Francis. There's a call for evidence phase currently live with the deadline for submissions of the 22nd of November. So if people haven't contributed to that review, I really, really encourage people to do. In opposition, I was a big champion working alongside Teach the Future to make sure that young people learn about a curriculum and the climate, learn on the curriculum, the climate crisis and sustainability. And that's something I've brought into the department as a new minister, and I know that my colleague Kat McKinnell, that's working really closely with Becky Francis on this, will be really keen to hear the views of the sector, but also children and young people directly. Yesterday I did a similar session with young people, and it was very evident to me how strongly felt they feel with regards to the need to see more on the curriculum. It shouldn't just be down to geography or science, but should be interwoven across the curriculum. So it's really important that people contribute to that review. And I think the other point that you made, Christine, is that doesn't fall on one particular government department to take forward this agenda. And that's why I'm really encouraged by what I've seen already in terms of this mission-driven government, that we link with the growth agenda. We also link with the commitments that Ed Miliband's team are delivering with regards to net zero, and also colleagues in DEFRA and other departments around access to nature, because I think there's so many ways that we can work across department to make sure that there's really good quality sustainability and climate education across the school system. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Stephen. And something that's come up a lot in the question and answer here related to curriculum integration is the question of teachers' time. Obviously, the curriculum is very full at the moment. Teachers struggle to find the time to read these additional resources, gain new skills, and even during initial teacher training, when they are nearly full time on learning, the curriculum there for teaching teachers is also very, very full. There's so much more that we've talked about that would be good to get in there. But how is it that teachers can find the time to do this and carve that out? I know you're not a school leader. I don't expect you to tell us how exactly school leaders should do their job. That's for the school leaders. But how does this become not just government by announcement that we have an ambition, but actually ensuring that there's the capacity to do it?
Yeah, good question. I think from my time as a school governor and from my time talking to teachers and parents, it's quite clear to me that the moment children aren't leaving school ready for work and ready for life, and ultimately this is about choices, isn't it, in terms of what children learn at school. And if we want to green our economy, if we want to have a more sustainable, fairer society, then we need to make sure that children and young people are learning and gaining the skills that they need for those jobs for the future. And that's why I think it's absolutely important that sustainability and climate change is fed into the curriculum assessment review, and we do look at how we change the curriculum as a result of that.
Brilliant. So, Dawn, I wonder if you might talk briefly about how you find the time in your schools, if you have any advice for Stephen on this.
Yeah, so I think that what I'd simply say here is that what you make important becomes important, and when people understand why, then they're more inclined to create the time and the space to make things happen. Now, we have a deep belief that we empower our staff. We have a deep belief that sustainability, climate action, education really, really matters. So as Stephen, you've said, it's not just in one thing. And it's not just, it is omnipresent. It's not another thing to do. It's part of everything we do. And we think about integrating it into all of the approaches across the family, whether that's our estates work, whether it's our catering, whether it's recycling, our digital technology, our curriculum, empowerment of students through student leadership, student voice, through our Windsor Academy Trust COPs, our What COPs. So what I really like around what Stephen has just set out in terms of the 4 areas in terms of sustainability is that there are many ways that Stephen and the government can integrate this into the levers they have to pull, the regulatory levers, the policy levers, national strategies, national approaches, and national programs. So Stephen has spoken about the curriculum and assessment review, but equally, there's lots that we need to do in the opportunity mission around green skills and careers. So I think there are many policy areas that we can start to weave this in rather than thinking about it in 1 or 2 policy areas, or rather thinking about it, well, if we just build it into Ofsted, everybody will do it. What I think, that's the kind of the stick side of things. The carrot side of things for me is, if this government is talking about achieving and thriving, and I am deeply behind that, that is a breath of fresh air to me. And when we really start to define what thriving is, and that climate change and sustainability is part of that definition of children thriving, not just now, for the future, this country thriving economically, as well as in terms of, you know, from a sustainability perspective, young people's mental and physical health thriving. That's where we start to win hearts and minds, and people will do this and find the time. We find the time for things that are important. Humbly.
Thank you, Dawn. Now, I think we're coming up to wrapping up in 4 minutes' time. Stephen, I want you to have the final word here. The question that came up earlier was, what should educators who are listening here, I think over 100 of them or there were, to do about this? What would you like to see people take away from this and go and do in their communities?
Well, thanks so much, and really grateful again for the opportunity to talk to you and hear views and ideas. I mean, I mentioned earlier, this is something that I'm taking really seriously, and I think the mission-led government is an opportunity to make sure that we join this up across government to make sure we maximise the impact. But there are so many initiatives that we are currently doing that I'm really keen to make sure that people take up the opportunities around. So I mentioned the National Nature Park. I mentioned 3,500 schools and nurseries already involved. If you're not already involved, please do get in touch with us. We'd be delighted to support you in making that happen. There are grants available for certain schools as well, and also to contribute to the independent curriculum and assessment review. But if people have got other ideas and suggestions, please do feed them in as we take forward our ambitions and our strategy for the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists for contributing, particularly Stephen for making the time in this day, and to Carly, Learning Through Landscapes, for making all of this possible in this whole series, and particularly to all of you for coming along. Your many, many questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, sorry. There were so many, but this is not the end of EPI's work on this. Obviously not the end of Stephen or Learning Through Landscapes or Cambridge University Presses or Dawn's work on this. For our part, we are going to be publishing a report with Learning Through Landscapes on what we heard here on all of these questions and the chat, which we've been watching as well, and the previous roundtables. That'll be out by Christmas. The recording of this, along with all of the chat, will be on our website, so you can look at it later or send it on to your colleagues who couldn't make it here. So please do keep in touch, sign up for the newsletter, keep watching out for that, and following the work we're doing on this crucial topic. So thank you again all so much for coming on, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. Hope you have a fantastic afternoon. Goodbye.